I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche who said, if you have a why, you can live with almost any what. We're giving our kids millions of whats, but no why.
This listener writes in, my sister-in-law returned from leading a girls' small group at their church's youth camp. Out of the 4 girls in her group, 3 shared that they struggle with suicidal thoughts, and the 4th has a friend who does. These are girls from strong families. One is a homeschooler. They left the camp saying their favorite part was their small group time. Are young people hungry for real, in-the-flesh relationships and don't get that in our social media heavy culture? Or what do you think is behind this apparent increase in kids dealing with such heavy issues?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a lot of things. This is absolutely one of those things, which is social media is a fake you, and you put out a fake you put out a fake persona or the best of you know who you possibly can be to either elicit praise or pity, and then everything's judged by whether people notice you or not. It's not the same as face-to-face. It's not the same as voice-to-voice sort of relationships that we're actually made for. But there's also a lot behind this whole epidemic. And I don't mean just the suicide epidemic, although that is at alarming rates and has been for a while. Predates the pandemic. I certainly don't think that the way we treated high school students in particular that were already dealing with this sort of isolation and loneliness, that the lockdowns took into account the mental health side of things as well as the physical health side of things. And I think we're going to see how some of those policies are also going to, I think are going to be exposed to having made things worse in a lot of different situations. And we're going to have to think through that carefully.
And just for context here, I just looked at the CDC stats before we started the program here. And it does appear that as of the latest year, which is available, is 2017, and suicidal ideation seems to be down, but successful suicide attempts are actually at their highest rate on record, just a little bit ahead of the peak in the early 1990s. So you are correct about that. This is an epidemic happening right now.
Well, and the earliest numbers we have in the pandemic is that somewhere between 1 and 4 students suicidally ideated during the pandemic.
So there's no way COVID made it better.
There's absolutely no way COVID made it better. There's a lot of ways that it made it worse. Fear, anxiety, but there's also the larger context of meaninglessness. A culture in which everything is oriented horizontally and nothing is oriented vertically is a culture in which there are no boundaries, there's no design, and there's no goal. We did a BreakPoint several years ago about a study that's been going on in the UK among young people for the last 10 years. And, 10 or 15 years ago, I don't remember the exact number, but, young people were asked, is there meaning to life? And about 1 in 10 said no. 10 years later, the same study found 9 in 10 British young people said that there was no meaning in life. But what we mean by meaning is ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose. And when everything is sold to the younger generation as being something that is immediately meaningful, in other words, there's nothing ultimate that I'm shooting for. There's nothing kind of solid that I can kind of dig my heels into and base my beliefs on and find meaning in life. And so I've just got to construct meaning. We know ourselves better than that. We don't trust our own ability just to make something meaningful because we like it. I think you add to that one more thing. And just the other day, Dr. Angela Franks, who is a theologian, I heard her give a talk on the idea of the fluidity of the human person in our culture. And she talks about so much how, the body is treated as not something that is essential to who we are, but it's basically our canvas where we have to express ourselves. And of course, Carl Trueman talks about that as well. But think about the pressure that puts on everyone. That if I don't, in other words, there's nothing substantial to who I am. There's nothing eternally meaningful. The institutions and the social relationships that used to help me figure out who I am, I'm a part of this community, I'm a part of this family, and my dad is, and, here's the sort of people we are. That sort of language is long, long gone in a modern world where family is broken down and our social relationships are so fragmented and scattered that all we have is what we're painting essentially on our outward selves. That's putting the whole weight of the world on our shoulders, and we realize how heavy it is and how how weak our backs are, and it's just a matter of time where the weight's too much, particularly for the pressure felt, by students that aren't giving. In other words, I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche who said, if you have a why, you can live with almost any what. We're giving our kids millions of whats, but no why. And that's an unsustainable path.
So, John, I'm reading Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone right now. I'm several chapters into it. I know that's one of those books you talk about all the time. Chuck talked about it all the time, and I'm finally just now getting around to it, catching up. But his focus is on the breakdown of all the kind of institutions that created social capital in our culture, other than just the family. Do you think there's a factor to be talked about there where young people in particular are just lacking any social structure of lasting value and participation other than this sort of amorphous internet world and whatever their home life is?
Yeah, there's no question. And it's an example of, basically denying things that actually exist, the forces of nature, things that are actually created into the fabric of reality, and trying to give a substitute as if you can do that. We're made in the image of a relational God. That's one of the differences between the Christian God and the understanding of God in Islam, for example. That it's not that God does relationships with a Trinitarian theology. He is a relationship. It's part of his essence. So if relationships are who God is and we're made in his image, then relationships can't be seen as fluid or pliable or non-essential to who we are as humans as well. And the poor substitute of, kind of these digital connections, as if they're the same sort of strong social bonds that have held people together and families together and help people establish who they are. It's just not going to be enough. Peter Berger, one of the great sociologists of our day, says that humans are suffering, our culture is suffering from he called it a perpetual identity crisis. And, I don't think it's any of these things. I think all of these things are kind of perfectly storming around our kids, and it's unsustainable.